Hello, I'm Mark, and welcome back to the second part of my Unreal Engine tutorials on how to add buoyancy to your physics-based movement system. So, as always, I like to do a quick little recap of what we did in the last video, so let's get started. So first off, we went ahead and in Visual Studio we went and created an enumerator to help us determine whether we're going to be floating on the surface of the water or whether we're going to be diving underneath it. We also created our sponson setups, and so this will allow us to create a variable depth buoyancy system so that we can either be floating on the top of the water or it can allow us to fully immerse our vehicle under the water. And then we created the actual system with our global settings and parameters to be able to manage the sponsons that are connected to it. And then after we did that, we came over to our vehicle traits and we updated the vehicle traits so that we made the water height, and this is the immersion depth or water height, a input property, which will, and this is the property which will be used to create all the calculations we need when it comes to floating or submerging under the water. And then we also went ahead and updated our vehicle simulation state by adding the immersion state, since this is something we want to be able to track to determine whether we're on top of the water or whether we're under the water. And then once we did all that, we went ahead and integrated that into our physics movement component. Alright, so that should do it for everything with Visual Studio. In this part, and we're going to go ahead and move over to the editor and let's go ahead and play with our flotation system. So I'm just going to go ahead and minimize this. So before we get started, we will be using the submarine here. I found this out on Fab, and so I will leave links to its location in the Fab store. Now if you're in a country which where Fab is now kind of restricting access to certain assets, you can also pick it up from the manufacturer or the developer's main website. So I'll also leave this link so you can go and either pick up a sub, or if you want to play with one of the ships or the boats, you can do that as well. So alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and move this off screen as well so we can get started. So since we're playing with water, we need to create a water environment map. So I went ahead and created a new world partitioning map, and I did a couple of things here. First off, I went ahead and created a cratered system. So let me just speed this up. So as you can see, we've got some topology under a water plane, and I'm also using a physics volume to determine so that we can switch to swimming mode or not. Depending on how far we're into that volume. So again, this system is designed to work with a physics volume right now. So in order to create a crater, you can just come up to the select mode, go to landscaping if you and you can, if you haven't played with this, you can use sculpt, maximize your brush setting, and then if you hit shift, you'll be able to crater, versus if you don't when kind of using the tool, it will then raise it. So you can create mountains and craters. And that's kind of how I did that. So let's go over to that, back to selection. As far as the water, I went ahead and created a series of water tiles in an actor and a blueprint. And then I just went ahead and just laid it over, and then I just expanded it. So again, I've just created this. It's just a default with a whole bunch of planes with a water material on top. And all I did was I just expanded the scale so that it would just fit, and I just then gently put that right on top of the physics volume. So that's kind of what I did there. And also, as far as the physics volume, again, I just created a single volume large enough to fill the crater. And again, if you're using a physics volume for water, just make sure you have water volume turned on. Otherwise, if you drop something into that volume and water volume's not turned on, our medium will just continue. Our vehicle will just continue to plummet down like it's falling through this water volume here, and make sure it's turned on. But that should be about it. As far as the water is concerned, I did make one additional change since I wanted to make sure that we could make this water kind of act like water, so we could move through it, so we don't collide straight onto it. So to do that, if you haven't done it this way, you can go into the project settings, and in the project settings, you can come down to collision under engine. And you can actually go ahead and create a new object channel, and that's kind of what I did. So under here, I created this water object, and you can just hit new, give it a name, and then you can say whether to ignore, overlap, or block. I decided to just create a new object channel called water, and I told it to ignore it. And then by doing that, I assigned that to our object here. So this is our BP water. So if I bring this over, this is on BP water. And then under each one of these, so let's just grab all the water panel planes showing the viewport. All I did was I just selected all of them, came over to the collision, and under here, under collision, I just went ahead and set this to custom. Right. So I set the preset to custom, and I've then changed the object channel to water. So that's what this is going to be referred to as. So anything that does a trace on it or anything that is going to collide with it will treat it as water, and it will just ignore it. So it'll just go right through. And you just need to make sure if you're using multiple planes like I am here, then you need to make sure each one of them is set to water. Otherwise, if you're just using one, you can just use one. But that's just a collision with the plane there. All right, so that's pretty much how I set up the environment. So we've got the environment, we've got what we're going to be using. So now we've created our lake. Let's go ahead and test out our floating system. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to create a quick little cube, give it some buoyancy, and kind of watch the thing drop in and float. Okay, so to make our test cube, let's go to the content drawer, and in the content drawer we're going to come down to content, movement, blueprints, and within our blueprint folder I'm just going to right click and go to blueprint. I want to use the pawn class right here, and I'm just going to say BP underscore, I'm going to just call it a water cube, and I'm just going to open it up. So first off, we're going to need an object. So let's go up to components, under add, I'm going to say cube, and let's go get our cube. Now again, to make sure that our cube is working with our component, we need to make sure that the cube is in the root. So we can just drag and drop it into the root. And then over here in the physics, we want to turn on physics. I'm also going to update the mass, just give it a little bit more weight as it's, so that we can kind of see it floating a little bit more in the water. So again, turn physics on, turned on mass in kilograms and gave it 500 kilograms. As far as everything else, that can stay the same. And as soon as we turned it to a physics volume, Unreal Engine updated the physics actor. And as you can see, here's our new water object type, and it's set to ignore. So Unreal Engine's added that for us. So this blueprint object, when we drop it in the water, it will ignore that water plane, and it will just fall through it like it would if it was the surface of the water. All right, so let's go ahead and set up the camera so we can kind of watch our cube drop into the water. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and add a spring arm. And on that spring arm, I'm going to set that to 600, and let's go ahead and give it a socket offset of -130 on the z-axis, and this will actually allow us to put the camera underneath so we can actually watch the camera fall through the water. And let's go ahead and add that camera. And the camera can just stay the same. So next, let's go ahead and add the simulation component. There's our vehicle simulation component, and as you can see, we now have the new buoyancy system up there too, in there. And I'm just going to go ahead and minimize the medium. So we will be taking advantage of these mediums. So we have air and water already kind of pre-packaged for us, and I'm just going to use the default values for this this demo. But we will need characteristics for this cube anyway. I'm going to use characteristics for both air and water, since we'll be dropping it from air into the water. So I kind of want to show you how that kind of works. Alright, so we have the camera. We got that set up. I just want to make sure all of this stuff is set up. Alright, that looks good. Alright, so let's set up our vehicle simulation. So first off, we need to give some fluid dynamics characteristics. So I'm just going to set this to medium 1 by default, and let's go ahead and add the medium 1 characteristics. So forward. So on all three axes, I'm going to say it's 500. Since it's a cube, it's going to be 500 by 500, which means it's 5 meter by 5 meter cube. And I'm going to leave the drag coefficient, and I'm just going to eliminate the lift coefficient. So I just want it to lift. I just want it to fall through the air. Just be warned, if you set this a little too high, it is possible for right now with the system, as it's kind of changing from air to medium, it might accidentally force the object to bounce a little bit. So, but leaving it at 0.1 should be fine. Alright, so that is our medium for air. Let's go ahead and set up the medium for water, so when it interacts with water. And so this, again, 500, 5 meter by 5 meter. Drag coefficients, you can stay the same. I'm just going to go ahead. And again, no lift. We'll keep all that the same. Alright, so that should be the fluid interactions. Now let's go ahead and set up the buoyancy. So under here we have our new buoyancy system. And I'm just going to open this up. And let's add a float point or a sponson. Since this is just a static, I'm just going to leave the location here. So that's going to put it dead center, which is where the center of gravity and the center of mass is on this cube. As far as an immersion depth, I'm just going to set this to 10, and I'm just going to leave max immersion, since we're not going to be submerging the cube, we're just going to be dropping it in. And then as far as buoyancy coefficient, we can keep that the same. Really nothing else needs to really change here. So now that that's all set up, I think we've got everything we need to just do a quick little drop test to make sure everything's working. So I'm just going to go ahead and move this off to the side, and we're going to come back to our water. As you can see, I had a little drop test here before, so going to bring in our new drop test object, and as you can see right now, it's kind of interacting with the plane, so I'm just going to bring it up above the plane a little bit. As you can see, it's kind of the distance is kind of deceptively a little deceptive when you're out here, so that's probably a good height. And I'm gonna set this to player 0. I'm just gonna make sure that this is turned off. Oops. That's disabled, yep, cool. So this should be the camera that we should be watching as it kind of drops in. So let's see how this is going to interact. So let's just save this real quick. I'm going to hit play, and there it goes, and it's continuing to fall through the water. Ah, I know why. We set the minimum. We set the. Let's see. You have the min immersion depth. min buoyancy, max buoyancy. Ah, that's right. Need to make a little change in the event graph. So what we did was we dropped from the air, but we didn't switch over to the water. So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and do our begin overlap here. So it dropped in, as you can see, it did go down, and then it did eventually repulse and slow down, but it's still kind of slowing down as if it was kind of going through the air. So we need to change the medium. So to do that, let's go ahead and implement our function that we created to allow us to change that medium, and that's on the vehicle simulation component. And if I just do this and I say set physics medium, this is a function that we created a while back when we were creating that system, so that we could go ahead and switch it over. So this is what we have. We'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and play with it here. So what I want to do is I'm going to drag off this, and I'm going to say cast to. So on the actor overlap, I'm going to say cast the other actor which we're overlapping with, and see if it's going to be a physics volume. If it's a good cast, I'm going to say promote to variable. So we have the physics volume, but also I'm going to say if it's a good cast, I'm going to then say get the water volume. So this is going to see if that water volume is being checked. If it is checked, right, then let's do a branch, which is going to be a decision tree for us. So we're going to make a decision. If it's true, and this is a physics volume, and it's set to water, then we want to use medium 2, which is our water density. And then, just to kind of finish things off, I'm going to put an event end overlap. So this is the end overlap. So this is if we are no longer in. So this will happen as soon as we overlap. This will happen when we are no longer overlapping with this object. And again, we're gonna. All I'm just gonna actually do here is I'm just actually gonna just keep it simple. I'm just gonna grab this. So if there's a if we are not overlapping with it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the physics volume here. Going to get that. We should do this. Branch that real quick. And all I want to do is I want to make sure if if this actor and this actor are equal, right? That way we're no longer overlapping with this specific anymore. Then we'll just revert it back to medium 1. All right, so now we've got that fixed. I'm just going to move this off. I've compiled and saved. So now if we run this again, as you can see, our cube goes underwater, and then it comes back up, and then the buoyancy system will kind of neutralize that out, and now we have a cube that is now floating on the top of the water. All right, so we've tested our buoyancy system on a cube, and it looks like we can float a physics body. So now let's go ahead and turn our attention to the submarine. So let's make a real vehicle that can take advantage of this system, as well as being able to just float on top of the water and tool around on top of the water. It can then also go under the water as well. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to go ahead and close this blueprint off screen. Okay, so if you're following along, I'm going to be using the Vigilant West Los Angeles class sub, and so if you're downloading it from Fab, You know, you can download it into your content library, and then from there you can add it to your project. Be warned, there are two versions of it. You want the one which is just the asset only without the movement. That's the one I'm currently using. But then once you download it, you should get it into a folder like this, and it may give you a prompt saying that there are some files which it wants to override. That's in relationship to these shared files here, and you already have them, so you can either say ignore or just override it. It shouldn't matter either way. But once you have the assets, we just need to do a little bit of prep work. So that we can use this submarine with our physics system. So to do that, what we want to do is we want to come down to our physics asset here, and we're going to make a couple of changes. So I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate the asset, and I'm going to set it to sim. And within the asset, as you can see, there's a lot of things that we have that it has set up. I'm going to just remove the screw joint. So this is our propeller, right? So I'm actually just going to remove that, but I'm going to keep everything else because I just want to have the propeller move, but everything else on this I'm just going to keep the same for now. So because I'm keeping everything the same and we want to put everything into simulated, we need to lock up all of these constraints. So as you can see, all I did was I just selected all of them by just hitting the first one, hitting shift, and hitting the last one, and then I'm just again selecting each and every one of these yellow joints because we need to go down to the angular limits and we need to lock it. So as far as the linear limits, it's already locked. I'm just going to lock the angular limits since I don't want any of these things to move at all in our simulation. So I'm going to do that, hit save, and then I'm going to come back up to the central gravity joint, and I'm going to select everything. And then here, I'm going to come up to the physics type. Instead of multiple values, I'm just going to go ahead and set this to simulated. So everything is going to be set to simulated. That way, that way now it's now set so that it can be used as a physics body. Alright, so now that we've got that done, I'm going to go ahead and let's go back into the content drawer and come over to our submarine. And here we can just come over to the asset details, and then under here come down to physics and switch this over to use the Los Angeles _sim asset instead. Alright, so we've updated the skeletal for the sub, so that should be good. That's all we need to do there, so I'm just going to go ahead and close that. So next, let's go ahead and set up our inputs. So to do that, I'm going to just go back up to our movement folder under blueprint, actually under inputs, and under actions. I'm going to create two new actions. So I'm going to right click and go to the, where is it, input, there it is. And I'm going to say input action, and this is just going to be, the first one's going to be IA underscore vehicle mode. This is going to be used to either dive or surface my submarine. And then the next one, I'm just going to duplicate this real quick, and I'm just going to call this camera mode. And I want a camera. We want to change the camera, as you saw in the demo before in the first video. This is actually a very, very large submarine, and so because it's large, I need to have multiple camera angles to see where we're going. Otherwise, it just makes things a little bit easier to steer it. All right, so and under here, we're just going to keep it in the default. It's just going to be a simple boolean. So for both that and for both that, again, simple booleans. I'm just going to hit save, just make sure we've saved all that. And so then I'm just going to come back up to inputs, and I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate the jet. So I'm just going to say duplicate this, and I'm just going to turn it from jet to boat. and I'm going to open it up. So under here, we already have some mappings, but we don't need all of these. So I'm actually going to remove the flaps, since we don't need flaps, and I'm going to remove roll, since we don't need to worry about roll. We need pitch and we need yaw, and so I'm going to keep the pitch on the right thumb controller, and I'm going to keep the yaw on the left thumb controller. So the pitch is on the y-axis of the right, and the yaw, which is our steering, is going to be on the left axis, on the x-axis of the left controller. As far as the throttle, again, that's just going to be on the D-pad, and it's going to be the same sticky throttle system that we used for the jet. The only difference is I'm probably going to have it set up so we can also do a reverse thrust, so we can, in case we need to go backwards. Alright, so that should do it for the inputs. We need to add 2 more inputs, and that is the vehicle mode. So I'm just going to hit plus for vehicle mode. So I'm just going to come down here and find the vehicle mode, and I'm going to hit plus again, and I'm going to set up the camera mode. So I've got to find that. There it is. And so for this, again, I'm going to be using my Microsoft controller. So I'm just going to turn this on. As you can see, the input device has been connected. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the little keyboard, and I'm going to set my dive to my Y key, and I'm going to set the camera mode to my A key. So I can just click on this and then click on the control, the button on the controller, and then Unreal Engine will map that to the correct controls. Alright, so that should do that. And then as far as any modifiers, we don't need any modifiers, but we do need to update the triggers. So I'm just going to go ahead, and they're both going to use the same trigger. It's just going to be a simple little press. So I'm going to set that to press, and I'm going to set this trigger to press. So this is kind of like me pressing the button, right? It's going to hold it down, and then as soon as, and it's going to just act, and then there's a threshold there. So it's going to, if the press is down for 0.5 of a second, it will then trigger. And it's the same thing for this one as well. So we don't need to do anything else. We just keep that there. Alright, so that should do it for the inputs. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this. So now that we're done with inputs, we can now go ahead and move over to the main event, which is building out our submarine. Okay, so to build out a submarine, we're just going to come down to our content drawer. And let's go back up to our movement and our blueprints. And so this is where we've been keeping all of our test articles, vehicles that we're using to test out our physics system. And again, I'm just going to right click, come up to blueprint class, and again, we'll just use this pawn class right here. And I'm just going to say BP underscore sub, short for submarine. And we'll just go ahead and open this up. Alright, so here, let's go ahead and set up our submarine. So first, let's bring in our skeletal mesh. So I'm just going to grab our skeletal mesh and move that into the default slot. So we always, so our system again, we want to make sure the skeletal mesh is in the default slot. Alright, once it's in, we are going to need a skeletal mesh asset, so we can find our Los Angeles sub. There it is, and if I bring the camera out, there she be. Alright, so there's our submarine. I do want to use the animation blueprint, since I'm going to need that for the propeller. So let's go find that. There it is, APB West Los Angeles. So we'll grab that, compile and save. Then we need to simulate physics. Gravity's enabled. Make sure that everything else looks good. It does. Just going to minimize the advance. And then under the collisions, we don't want no collision. I'm just going to set this to vehicle. And it's the owner, so everything else looks okay. Hit compile and save. And I think that should do it for the mesh setup. So again, simulated using our skeletal mesh, and that should automatically have it use our physics asset. And we're going to be using the animation blueprint. All right, so off the skeletal mesh, we want to do a couple of things. First, let's go ahead and set up our camera. So to do that, we need a spring arm. And for our spring arm, I am going to set up the values as so. So for arm length, I'm going to use 7500. So we'll give it a nice big long reach out. As far as the parent socket, I think we can just keep it there. It's just going to have it parent socket to the center of this sub. So I think we're okay. And then as far as the offset here, again, this is a very large vehicle, so I'm going to use 1000. So we're back 750 and up 1000. That should kind of put us a little bit above our submarine. And then after we're done with this, we can go ahead and attach the camera. So I'm just going to keep everything else the same. Actually, you know what? I am going to turn some lag on. Why not? Give it a little bit of lag, I think. So I can kind of see it a little bit, so it's not completely tight. And let me just check camera settings real quick. Yep. All right. So yeah, that should be it for the spring arm. Let's go ahead. So I've got a little bit of lag in there. Set the lag variables to 5, and again, arm length is a really large number, and same with the socket offset too. So let's go ahead and just attach that camera. All right. So that should do it for the camera. The only other thing I want to do is the submarine. Yeah, it comes with a nice little asset which we can use to kind of show when the blades get really fast, we can have a little bit of an effect on there. So I'm just going to add that in. So I'm going to come up to the skeletal mesh and say add, and I'm going to be looking for a Niagara particle system, and this is going to be. I'm just going to call it prop FX, and this is going to, if I come over here, I'm just going to scroll down and we should find the Los Angeles propeller effect. And on this propeller effect, I'm actually going to attach this effect to the screw socket. So I'm just going to click on the little folder here, come down, and there's our screw joint. So I'm going to attach that right there. And I think that should do it for everything that we need right now. All right, so we have the spring arm, we have the camera on the spring arm, and then we have the propeller effect. So the only other thing we need now is to bring our simulation component in so we can bring this submarine to life. There we are, vehicle simulation. I'm going to hit save, compile and save. Alright, so let's go ahead and just set up the component. So for this one, I'm just going to use one medium, which is going to be our water medium, which is right here. And we are going to need an object profile, and again, set that up for medium 2. And So what I want to do, I'm just going to go ahead and simulate the dimensions of this sub. So I went ahead and looked up online the dimensions for the submarine, and those dimensions are as follows. So it has a width of 1,000 centimeters, which is 10 meters. Surface height, and this is kind of like the draft of the ship. I'm going to set the drag coefficient to 0.3, kind of stiffen that up a little bit and get rid of any lift. So for the side profile, again, I'm just going to put these numbers in. Again, I found these online. And again, these are centimeters, so if you find it meters, just add 2 more zeros or move the decimal point 2 to the right, and that should do it. We'll reconnect that when we're ready. All right, and then the last one, again, setting that up. As far as a drag coefficient, I'm going to set this. I'm going to set this to 1 and 1, make it really stiff. And I'm going to set that to 0 and 0 over here. So there's no lift. Going forward, to be expected, that should be relatively, straightforward. We don't want that much resistance. But if we're going down and going up, right, we want to have more resistance because we have more of the ship kind of pressing down against the water column. I think that's probably a little too stiff, so I'm probably going to go like 0.8. 2.8. So that should stiffen that up. All right, so that is it for the fluid dynamics piece. So let's go ahead. So the next piece, let's set up the static thruster. So I'm just going to click on here. Again, this is just going to be a simple static thruster so that we can give our vehicle some forward thrust. So I'm going to set this to, again, the screw joint. So that's the location of where we want this thing to be. Enable thruster. I'm going to leave it on the x-axis. Thrust direction can stay the same. Thrust point. Again, I'm just going to put this on the joint. So that's the tag name. That's the joint, and there's no offset on that. And then as far as the amount of force, I'm going to set this to a very large number since we have a very large vehicle that we need to be moving through our medium. All right, as far as condition, it can stay the same. We're good there. And I'm not using any curves for this, so I think we're okay. If you wanted to do a density curve, as you kind of get deeper in the water, you can reduce the amount of thrust. You could do that if you wanted to. I'm just going to keep it, or increase the amount of thrust, I guess. You could do that. It's up to you. All right, so after that, let's go ahead and define the control surfaces so we can steer our submarine. So, and there's a lot of control surfaces. We have about 6 control surfaces here that we want to set up. So the first 2 are going to be the rudder. So I'm just going to pull this in real quick. So we've got our rudder enabled. I'm going to set the area for both of these rudder controls to 12. And I'm going to give a 30-degree angle on the rudder control. And I think I'm just going to set a drag multiplier on both of these to 2. So again, these are the same control surfaces that we created for the fighter jet. We're just using them now for our submarine. Alright, so those are the 2 rudders. So that's the top rudder, the top rudder and the bottom rudder at the back of this submarine. Alright, so next is going to be the 4 dive planes. So I'm just going to minimize this to get some real estate. So for the dive planes, let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and do the back dive planes first. Oh, before we do the rudder, one thing I forgot to do, so let me just minimize this real quick. We need a location for both of these. So right now this is set to, if we don't put a location, it would be on the center of gravity joint, which we don't want. We actually want them on the back of the submarine. So let's go ahead and add those joints as well. So they like to use a rather large socket name. So there's the upper steering wheel horizontal joint for the top rudder, and we're going to be using the lower joint for the bottom rudder. And you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and just put that in as a tag name too, so I can kind of see what they are. Alright, so that should set, when everything starts up, that should go ahead and set those force points for our flight controls. So upper, lower, lower. Alright, and there's no offset. Alright, so for the dive planes, again, so these are going to be the rear dive planes. So let's go ahead and do the rear dive planes. So this was going to be the steering wheel vertical back left, and I'm going to go ahead and just put that in there. And set this to 10. Make this 30, and I'm just going to set this to 2. Everything else can stay the same. So we have the left set up, so I'm just going to go set up the right. Alright, so, and again, no, not negated, or there's no offset, I should say. I'm going to set the area to 10, and I'm going to set the control angle to 30. So I'm just going to keep them the same. The only difference here is just one's on the left side, one's on the right side, based on the joint location. Okay, so that's left, that's right. And then I'm going to add 2 more. So we have the rear dive planes, which are back here, but we also have the dive planes on the sail. So I'm going to go ahead and include those as well. So let me go find that information real quick. So this is the vertical on the left. Oh, and since these are dive planes, let's change these from rudders to elevators. So the first 2 are rudders. Yep. The second 2 are elevators, and this is going to be an elevator. These 2 are also going to be elevators. So this is going to be the forward diving plane on the left, and again, I'm for this, I'm just going to make that 10, and I'm just going to go ahead and give it 30 degrees. And a drag multiplier of 2, no lift. Lift is just going to stay the same. And for this, I'm going to also say negate direction. And I want to do this. If I don't do this, then what we end up having is because of where the joint location is. This is actually forward of the center of gravity joint, where the rear ones are in the rear. We want the submarine to tilt forward or back. If we don't negate the forward ones, then what will end up happening is that where the ones on the back are going to push up, if we don't negate it, these ones are going to push up, and we end up pushing the sub up, but we don't end up pitching the sub down, so we don't create that seesaw. So we have to. So that's why we're going to negate the forward ones, so that we don't so we don't try and cancel the force out. All right. So again, elevator. I'm just going to put that there, and I'm just going to put that in there. No offsets is negated. Area of 10, and then 30. 0 camber. No lift. I'm just going to have drag. Alright, so that should do it for our control surfaces. So we've got 6 of them, 4 dive planes, and 2 rudders. So again, just double checking, that's a rudder, that's a rudder, that's a dive plane, that's a dive plane, that's a dive plane negated, and that's a dive plane negated. Alright, cool. Alright, so now that we've got the control surfaces done, we can now come down to the buoyancy system and start setting this up. So when I was setting this up for the sub, for the demo, I elected to use 6 flotation points. And this can be a little bit tricky. For a ship, you can probably get away with just setting up the points and balancing it out. By putting the float points where you need to. But when working with a submarine, because we're working between a vessel with 0 and with a neutral buoyancy as well as a positive buoyancy, we kind of have to balance the submarine first on a neutral buoyancy, and make sure everything is still balanced out and that there's little to no pitch between the float points before we can, and once it's set, in order to set it up, because we're going to be moving into that neutral. So it can be a little bit tricky, where if it's just a surface vessel and it's staying on the surface, you could probably just go ahead and put these out and you wouldn't have to worry about trying to balance it too much. All right, so we need 6 of these, so I'm just going to go ahead and put 6. So the first 2 are going to be the bow and stern. So I'm going to go ahead and put bow in here. And stern there. As far as location is concerned, everything is going to be in relationship to the center of gravity joint. So if I come back to our content drawer, and I go to our submarine, right, and I just click on it, click on our root, right, that should get us to the center of gravity. So we have a root joint, and then we have a central gravity joint. The central gravity joint and the root joint should be the same, right? Yeah, they're almost identical, and so that's the central gravity of the vehicle, and that's where our physics particle is going to be attached to. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm actually going to be balancing out 6 float points. I'm going to have one in the bow, 1 in the stern, and then I'm going to create a box configuration in the middle of the ship to help kind of give it a bit more stability. Or a little bit more roll stability using a box. But you can kind of play with the configuration. Try out different things. As long as it's balanced out, you should be okay. And as long as you make sure, and then we just need to make sure that immersion depth is, our depth is in the right place as well. Otherwise, you could end up with an unstable platform. So as far as location, I'm going to make everything, so as far as the location, I'm going to move everything 50 above the center of gravity. That way I've actually got a lower center of gravity. So something that may be useful is, depending on how you're setting things up, if you want to, especially on a surface vessel, you might want to make sure that your center of gravity joint is below the waterline. Otherwise, if it's above the waterline there and you're trying to set up the flotation point, you could end up, based on that, you could end up with a unstable vessel. So again, we want to make sure that the center of gravity is below the waterline even for this submarine. So I'm going to set it up to 50 and 50. So on the stern, I'm going to move it forward of the center of gravity by that much, which is this is actually 2971.23, and again it's a very, very precise number because again I wanted to balance this out to a neutral pitch when I was kind of on a neutral buoyancy. So numbers do look a little crazy. And again, I'm going to go ahead and set the stern just to a flat negative 3,000. And then the immersion depth, since it's submarine, we're going to use 2 depths. So for the minimum immersion, so on the surface, we're just going to be at 150. So this is going to be 150 above the 50 here. So that's going to be our immersion. And then our maximum immersion, I'm just going to set it to 1,300. So that's the max, that's the min. So when we go to full immersion, it should take us all the way up to where these periscopes are. So it'll fully immerse us to periscope depth, and then from periscope depth, snorkel and periscope depth, we should be able to then go down. All right, so that's the bow and the stern. Let's go ahead and set up the box configuration as well. All right, so the first one I'm going to do is the port left, or port stern on the port side. Let's get the location done. And with this one, since I don't want it on center, I want to move it to the left. So we actually have, it's going to be again at 50. We're going to locate it here and we're going to move it there. So we're going to move it back into the stern or the aft. We're going to move it definitely left of the center joint. And again, we're going to keep it at that 50. And again, 150. So I'm keeping these immersion heights the same. Again, I just want to keep things level. But if you wanted to kind of tilt the vehicle in the water, so make it look like it's heavier in the back and lighter in the stern, right, or in the bow, then you could change that ride height using the immersion depth on your vehicle. But I'm just going to keep everything just level for this demo. All right, next is going to be starboard. in the stern. So again, I'm gonna put that there. This one's now going to be positive because we want it on the right side. And again, I'm going to keep this at 50. Immersion depth, again, I'm going to go 150, and I'm going to go ahead and run that. So 150 for min, 1300 for max. All right, so again, let's just double check the configuration. Looks good. Let's just minimize those two. All right, and then just need the file too. So here, again, I'm just going to keep this pretty simple. Now I'm just going to take the same ride height. And then finally, to balance things out, $50 and $50, so everything looks good. And again, make sure we've got the right immersion height. All right, so that should do it for setting up our sponsons or float points. Just making sure everything looks good. Don't have any discrepancies in the numbers. Looks good. Looks good. All right, so that's our sponson setup, and everything, again, I'm using the global socket, so everything's in relationship to the C joint. All right, so now let's go ahead and set up our buoyancy system. So again, that can stay there. That can stay at 1. Ramp velocity, I'm gonna, 20 is good for min. I'm gonna make this 200 for max, and I'm gonna set that to 2 on the maximum load. Everything else can stay the same, but since this is submarine, I'm gonna take surface stabilization off. All right, so that should do it for setting up the flotation. We've set up the thrust, we've set up the control, we've set up the buoyancy, we've set up the water, our counter forces as we move through water. So the last thing we need to do is just set up our throttle system. We don't need any rotation control, so we can keep that off. Everything's just going to be handled through the physics components that we already have. So I'm going to do a 6:2 ratio on the throttle, on the rise and the rise and the fall of the throttle. I'm going to set this up as an enable control, and I'm also going to set it up so we can do reverse thrust. And I'm going to say 0.1, so every time I hit the D-pad, we should be increasing the throttle by about 10%. And same here, and we'll keep the interpolation rates roughly the same. All right, so we don't need anything on the Z since we're not using Z. All right, so that is setting up the configuration. Everything looks good. So next up is setting up our event graph so that we can control our sub. Okay, so first what we're going to do is we're going to set up our add input mappings so that we can take advantage of our input mapping context that we just set up. So to do that, I'm just going to go up here and I'm going to add an event receive controller change. So this gets fired every time the controller changes hands on the character or the pawn. So from here we're going to say take the new controller and we're going to say cast to player controller. So if this new controller is going to be a player controller coming in, then let's go ahead and find get the enhanced inputs local. So we want to make sure we get that. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to do an is valid. Actually, I'm going to do an is valid off this. So we're going to check to make sure we have an is valid input local player subsystem, and if we have a valid input subsystem, then we can just go ahead and do the context mapping off that. So I'm just going to grab that node there, draw that out, clean that up a little bit, and then the mapping context, I'm just going to use that new IMC boat context that we created. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. So that's our mapping context. So next up on begin play, let's go ahead and we'll do two things. One, I want to go ahead and create the we'll go ahead and create our animation instance setup, but we'll also go ahead and add our viewport as well. So to do that, I'm just going to say, where is it? Skeletal mesh. So I'm going to grab skeletal mesh and I'm going to say get animation instance off that skeletal mesh. I'm just going to move these two down. And off this, I'm going to say cast to a ABP. There it is. That's what we want. Is the animation blueprint. So I'm just going to put all that there. And then here, I'm just going to say go ahead, promote to variable, and just going to give it a quick rename. I'm going to call it animation instance. And then after that, I'm going to drag off here and say create widget. So this is for the HUD. And I should be able to just go ahead and reuse the jet HUD. So I'm just going to reuse that for now. And I'm going to say get player controller. That way, actually I'm going to do two things here. Actually, we'll just keep it like that. So I'm going to say get player controller, and then once we get the player controller, I'm going to say add to viewport. All right, and that should do it. So again, we're reusing the jet, so in order for us to be able to reuse this, this HUD should be using an interface. So let's just go double check that real quick. So if I come under UI, if I come to jet, and we come to the graph, we have this using BPI HeliHUD interface. So we need to make sure that our sub is going to be implementing that interface. So to do that, I'm just going to come over to class settings, and under interface, right, implements, let's go ahead and find that. And there's the HeliHUD. So by implementing that interface, that's going to give us two methods over here, two functions, and we just need to make sure we implement those functions so that the HUD will be able to use our, we can use the same HUD for this vehicle too. So get simulation component, we're just going to go and return that. And get actor, and I'm just going to say self. That's just going to reference the self. So those are the two things we need on interface. So I'm just going to close those and come back. So we've set up, that should set up the HUD. I do not need the overlap for this. But I am going to need the tick for the screw events so that we can do that. So let's go ahead and set that up next. So to do that, I'm going to create, need two functions. We need the speed and the intensity, since we want to use the intensity for our particle effects. So I'm just going to go create a custom event. And let's just rename this set. Set prop intensity, and let's, this is going to take a parameter of float, and this is going to be the intensity. So this custom event, I'm just going to come down here, I'm just going to say multiply. So take the value coming in and multiply this by 0.04, and then I want to do a check. So I'm going to do a greater than, and the checker is going to be 18, and we'll see this because the value that's going to come in is going to be the rotation speed that I want. So I want to make sure that if we are greater than this speed, then we will go ahead and fire up the that effect. Otherwise, if it's less than that, I want to turn the effect off. So for that, I'm going to say, then I'm going to go branch, do a check, and let's go ahead and get our prop effects. And we're just going to use a set Niagara variable float, which is going to take in this literal here. So we want it to affect the, so there's a variable in that Niagara system called prop speed, and that's the variable which we want to affect, and that's the variable we're going to put in there. And then that's on true. On false, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to come down here and set the prop speed back to 0. So based on that prop speed, that will then determine the intensity of that bubble action coming out from the propeller. And so then next we just need to set the actual propeller speed. So that is going to be another custom event. Call it set prop speed, And again, we're going to take an input variable, and this is going to be the speed. And this one's just going to, so from here, I'm going to say set intensity. So this is our intensity, which we've just defined up here. All I'm going to do is I'm going to put the speed in there. So we have speed to intensity, and then off the intensity, I'm then going to go ahead and grab our animation instance, and then I'm going to say set the propeller speed. So there is our screw propeller speed, and again I'm just going to set that directly to the value coming in. Alright, so that should be for animations. I'm just going to go ahead and comment that. So that's our animations and effects. This is our, just put a comment here. That's our input mapping. So it's going to go grab all of this. Going to put that up there. All right, so save. Alright, so then I think the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do the input for vehicle mode as well as the input for the camera mode. So we've got those two new action inputs, so I'm just going to put them over here. So this is our input for vehicle input mode, and I'm just going to run this off a flip-flop. So all this does is it's setting a variable, it's setting this Boolean value every time we pass through the macro, and based on what it is, we want to take that variable. And so from there, I'm just going to drag off and put a branch, and I'm just going to pull this, and we're going to do it for both, since it's, you know, so what we want is to say if it's this, it's going to do this. Otherwise, if it's that, we're going to do the opposite. So from here, we're going to say set vehicle simulation, and we have that new function on there called set immersion state. So this is where we're going to go set the immersion state on our sub to either dive. So our initial state is if this is A, we're going to go and dive the boat. If this is B, we're going to go and surface the boat. So, and our initial state coming through is probably is going to be in the false state until we do the first trigger. So I'm just going to copy this and bring this down. And so on false, we're going to surface. And then off here, I am going to add two new float variables. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. I'm going to say this is camera offset underwater. And this one is going to be, I'm just going to compile. This is going to be a float. Compile again. And the camera offset underwater is going to be set to 0. On the surface, we'll go back to 1000. So I'll just keep that there for now. And I'm just going to duplicate. and rename. Compile save, and this is 1,000. So this will allow us to change. This is gonna. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just move the spring arm, and just reset the offset on the spring arm. By doing that, that'll move the camera. Another option would be just to have multiple cameras, and you could just switch between the active camera if you wanted to do that. But I'm just gonna opt to just move that. Just move the spring arm to a different position, and that'll work for me. So I'm just going to grab the spring arm here, and we're going to say set socket offset, and we're just going to move that to there, and I'm just going to go ahead and expand that. So this one I'm going to use the underwater. And then I'm just going to copy this again. Hooking that in there, and this one's going to use on the surface. I'm just going to put that there. Something else we could also do here is on these variables, I kind of just want to keep them as constants, since we don't necessarily need to change them. I'm just trying to find where I can set them as a constant value. Private spawn. Make it blueprint read only. There we go. Alright, so by making it blueprint read only, it means that when at runtime, you can't change these values. It's akin to making a constant value. So we'll just make it read only. Alright, so that should do it for our enhanced input for our vehicle mode. So the next thing I'm going to do is just do the camera mode, and for that it's AI underscore camera mode, and it's just going to be very similar to doing it this way. So I'm just going to borrow that real quick, and I'm also just going to go ahead and borrow this as well. Just making it really easy. That way we can just keep the camera modes the same. So it just allows me to switch it up. So this will allow me to, when we switch the camera, when we dive, we'll just move the camera. Actually, you know what? I'm going to break that link, and I'm going to break that link. I think for this one, I'm just going to have it so that we'll dive and surface, and then we'll just switch the camera on different. That way I don't have to change the camera at the same time. So that might look a little bit better. All right, so that should be it for the cameras. So let's just go ahead and finish up the on tick, and then we'll get the inputs done. So on the tick event for here, I'm just going to go ahead and get our vehicle simulation component, and I'm just going to say get current vehicle state, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to say, actually, come on, split structure, there it is, and I just want the X value of the throttle. And I'm going to take the X value of this throttle, and I'm just going to go ahead and multiply that by 600. So 600 is going to be the maximum number of revolutions, right? But the value coming off the throttle is going to be a fraction anywhere between 0 and 1. So that's how that's going to be set. And then from here, we can then just say set propeller speed. And prop speed will then call the prop intensity. And I think that's all we need to do there. And we can just pull that right off here. Let's hit save. All right, so that's the tick. So then we just need the controls. So first off, let's get the speed in there. So I'm just going to use the throttle X axes and grab the vehicle input, and I'm going to say set throttle input. And that's on the x-axis, so x-axis to x-axis, I think we're good there. So then we just need the dive planes and the rudder. So I'm going to start with the rudder first. Your inputs. And again, let's pull the vehicle simulation off, and then we'll say set your inputs and I'm just going to go ahead and map that into there, and then I'm just going to then do the same thing for the pitch. So alright, so pitches for the dive planes, yours for the rudders, and then we have the throttle speed. Alright, so let me just do a quick double check, make sure everything looks good on the event graph. Alright, everything looks good, so let's go ahead and grab our submarine, throw it into the lake, and hopefully it will swim and fly through the water. Alright, so let's just save this, and I will take this off screen momentarily. Alright, so first off, let's get rid of these two cubes. So we're not going to need these anymore, so let's just delete that, and let's just go ahead and delete that quick. Make sure that we've still got a physics volume. So we have the physics volume, and that's set to water. We got our water plane. Everything looks good. Alright, so let's just go ahead and bring our submarine in. I'm just going to float it there. And let's go ahead and move this into over here into a more optimal location. Got plenty of water underneath her. And I'm just going to make sure that we just set it to player 0. So everything should be working. I'm going to go grab my controller, and I'm going to hit the play button, start the simulation. Alright, so it looks like right now the sub's floating on the water. The flotation system seems to be working. And looks like our throttle is working. And if we take it up to a high speed, we'll get some particle effects. And if I take it back down, we'll go back into normal. Let's dive the boat. So there she goes under the water. Looks like we have a little bit of an issue. She's going a little too deep, and we have a negative pitch angle, so we've got a little bit of an issue there. But we'll take a look at it, and it looks like she's rolling up a little bit, coming out of the water. So we may have some configuration set up that we may need to take a look at. So let's see what's going on there. But for now, it looks like she's moving forward, and yeah, definitely looks like we got a little bit of a strange roll as she's coming up. So let's see what we got in the blueprint and see if we can correct that. So I'm just going to go ahead and stop the simulation. Let's just move the controller over and bring our blueprint back. All right, so well, that doesn't look right. I got a yaw coming into a yaw and a yaw going into a pitch, so I think we need to fix that. Let's go ahead and do that real quick. Where is it? Pitch input. Yeah, so, oops. Let's just go fix that real quick. But we still have an imbalance issue, so let's go take a look and see what we got. So if we go through lower steering horizon, that looks okay. So our rudders, upper, upper, lower, lower. So those two look okay for our rudder. Let's check our dive planes. So we have steering wheel vertical back, steering wheel vertical back, all right, and that's right and that's left, that looks right. We have left vertical, which is the front, for elevator it's negated. Up, here we are. Number 5 is the wrong one, so let's go ahead and fix that real quick. So let's go and find the mesh. So I'm going to come under here, go to vehicles, where's our Los Angeles class? Attack sub. And it looks like, I think we have the steering wheel. I'm just going to copy it. So we want the front joint. We accidentally have the back joint in there. So we have the front joint for the left, we need the front joint for the right. So let's go and rename that front joint and front joint. I'm going to hit that. So first off, we went and fixed this. So pitch goes to pitch, yaw goes to yaw. So hopefully we should be able to, that might fix, that'll fix the diving, but then we also should fix this unbalance, and this should also fix that little roll and that weird pitch. So let's go ahead and give it another whirl. So I'm going to grab my controller, hit the play button. Alright, so now we're going into the water. We're floating on the top with a little bob. Let's fire up the engine. I'm going to take it at half power. And let's submerge. That looks a lot better. We don't have a weird pitch angle there. Now let's see if I can dive the boat. So I'm just going to bring her down, and there she goes. Our submarine is now diving in the direction that I want her to. So we'll give her 6 degrees, let her come down, and let's test the rudder again. Yep, so she can turn. I'm turning her left right now, and we can turn her right. And I'm just going to go ahead and bring her back up. Alright, so it's very important when working with the controls to make sure that we have everything lined up and all the forces are going to be applied to the right place, otherwise you can get some really weird movement. Now we're at level flight, or through the water. As you can see, our submarine is turning. We've got a little bit of latency in the camera. Kind of show that slight turn. I'm going to make sure we go the other way. She's traveling through the water. And then I'm going to surface the boat. Now she's going to come back up, and she's now coming through the water plane. Surfacing up. And now she's leveling out on top of the water. And we've got a slight roll as she's coming out, but that's correcting itself. And then when we're on the top of the water, we can still turn using the rudder. Our dive planes can do a try, but as you can see, the buoyancy system's kind of preventing us from using the pitch. So there you have it. We've got a submarine which we can use to fly through the water. Just going to go submerge her again. And yeah, and we have a system here which can be used for both boats as well as submarines. That can be used for vehicles that can be both on top of the water as well as under the water, and everything can be balanced out. Alright, so I'm going to just pause the simulation here. And I think this is a good place to kind of wrap things up. So, as always, if you like what I'm doing, feel free to like and share my videos, as well as subscribe to my channel. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'll try to get back to you as quickly as I can. And yeah, I'll see you again in the next video. Cheers. Bye.